The difficulty chart, one of EToH's staples, and one that details how difficult just one tower is. Today, the chart has 12 difficulties, from easy to catastrophic. Though if we go back, this chart was widely different. For starters, there was a difficulty below easy, effortless. But if we look at the other side of the chart, it's much different. 3 new difficulties, all believed to be impossible at the time: horrific, unreal, and most importantly, nil. Sitting all alone, one citadel resided in the nil difficulty. The skill required was beyond comprehension. This was the Citadel Void. Sitting at the peak of nil, back then and still now, it is considered to be impossible for anyone to complete. But in today's world, it isn't the only nil difficulty obby Roblox has to offer, as many have been made, and many are leagues easier than the infamous Citadel. With the skill cap raising higher and higher every day, it brings the question: within EToH's lifetime, will players ever reach the skill possible to complete obbies considered nil? In order to find out, we need to go back. 2016. Obertune begins development on Tower of Heck. Wait, no, not that far back. Ah yes, 2019. Many important updates and events happened this year, but for our purposes, one stands out among the rest. On the 23rd of February, a famous player named Blockerman666 conquered the Tower of Inception. This tower spams terrible gameplay, mostly gimmicks with thin studs, and is highly punishing. Previously, the most difficult completion was Tower of Confusion, and that tower only sits at high peak insane. Tower of Inception, on the other hand, is high peak terrifying, meaning the community managed to do a jump of 2 entire difficulty points. To break the terrifying barrier though, we'll have to move on to 2020. As it's widely known, the Tower of Generation Failure was the first catastrophic tower ever beaten. The first ever completion of this was on July 11th of 2020, but that same completion was known to use various skips that made the tower much easier. So much easier that most people consider it to be a terrifying completion. If we want to be fully confident about an actual catastrophic completion though, we need to look for the first fully legitimate one. August 29th, 2020. This was when our first completion we can confidently call catastrophic occurred. So far, our chart is looking pretty empty, but it'll fill up soon. With a difficulty difference of 0.3 and a time difference of 553 days, on average so far, the skill cap is only increasing by this number of difficulty points every day, which is really small. At the end, we'll average these numbers out to get one good number. Coming back to the progression, nearing the end of 2020, more specifically December 20th, Tower of Elongated Runs was verified, and it was far more difficult than Generation Failure. To be exact, it was 0.67 difficulty points harder, meaning that we were progressing much faster now. Actually, the community was going 10 times faster now, going from 5 10,000ths of a point per day to 5 thousandths of a point per day. Getting past catastrophic would slow Obbyist down though, as the next hardest tower, Cruel Punishment, wouldn't be verified until July 8th of 2021, and it was barely a tenth of a point harder. Here's how many difficulty points per day the community was progressing at that time. With the hardest catastrophic being cleared, there was only one way from here: up. The next difficulty to get through was horrific, and this was a long one. Because the community doesn't consider Tower Vacant hindrances horrific, and actually consider it easier than Cruel Punishment, I'll be skipping over it and looking at the next horrific completion. Welcome to the Tower of Eternal Void. 10 floors from Citadel Void, all nerfed, but it still is far from easy. Sitting at mid-horrific, I can confirm that this is undisputably horrific. Our next big obbyist, and one that is still very prominent today, Skitsuna, was the one to verify this on July 24th of 2022, so about a year after our last completion. The skill difference here was 66 hundredths of a point, and dividing that by the exact number of days gives us almost 2 thousandths of a point per day on average, which isn't too bad. After that completion, the community already began preparing for the next and final difficulty, Unreal. This is the Citadel of Infinite Void, 12 floors of torment, with almost every fail sending you back to the start. The same Obbyist that verified Eternal Void, Skitsuna, was looking to verify this too. And well, after a year of no new artists, not including tiered obbies of course, it happened. On October 9th of 2023, and Unreal was finally finished. This was 47 hundredths of a point more difficult than Eternal Void, so it was again a jump. Still though, the time difference made the rate of progression around 1,000th of a point per day. I would talk about Tower of Spiraling Fates, but as it turns out, it's actually easier than Infinite Void today. With that, we are beginning to get to the end of this journey. The current top one and the next one verified is Tower of Cordiup. This time, it was a raw gameplay based on Unreal, which was a good sign for raising the skill roof. The verifier of this tower, Gene the Obbyist, set out to finish it before 2025, and he barely managed to do that on December 31st of 2024. But this was only 5 hundredths of a point more difficult, and it took much longer than a year. Now, the average skill increase per day was back down to around the 10,000th, but things could change. I won't account for this of course, but looking into the future, our next top tower is likely going to be Tower of Impending Doom. This tower is much harder than Cordiup, and it's another Void themed obby. As for the difficulty, the estimate is around low mid Unreal, so we'll say around a 10th of a point harder. If this is verified in the coming months, the skill cap will go back to rising at about 1,000th of a point per day again. But in order to find out when we'll reach our peak skill limit, we have to do a bit of calculating. Taking the mean of the difficulty increases per day, it comes out to around this number, or almost 2,000th of a point per day on average. That means, if no towers get moved down in difficulty, and if we keep progressing at this exact rate, we can reach peak Unreal skill, or 13.99, in 476 days, or just over a year. But Tower of Elongated Runs is a huge outlier, so if we remove TOER from the equation, the rate almost halves, and 476 days turns into 769 days, or just over 2 years, but it'd probably lean towards 3 years. In my opinion, the latter is much more likely. So, with maximum skill, what could be possible to achieve? Let's find out. This is the one and only Citadel Void. 22 entire floors filled to the brim with obnoxious, impossible, and luck-based gameplay. As our first Nil Obby, I believe that this isn't even close to being humanly possible, and here's why. Firstly, because of the sheer length and punishment, the main difficulty source isn't even from the raw gameplay, and keep in mind, the Citadel constantly has gameplay like this. But to really prove the point, we'll go straight to the hardest floor, floor 21. As the second to last floor, you will need to pass every single floor before this first try consecutively, just to get one chance here. Additionally, the closest this floor has ever been to completion is 20 different segments. Terrible insta-kill dodging, wall walks, glitches, and an entire tier 18 you at the first try makes this beyond reasonability for even the best players. Again, even making it to this floor requires passing floors like 17 with its horrendous B blocks and 9 with the classic impossible wall walks. So, with all of this, I think we can shut down the idea of this being done and put this argument to rest. I know this video has only been focused on towers so far, but some of the most known and well-made Nil Obbies are tiered obbies. Instead of being rated with difficulties, these are rated with tiers, but we'll be focusing on tier to 21. which is believed to represent at least part of the Nil difficulty. This brings us to our next adventure, Misplaced in Time, a tier 20, and this is definitely more debatable than Citadel Void. First off, this is a 20-minute tiered, so the gameplay is easier than most at this tier, and that's going to be good for us. Most jumps will lead to the end of your run, but sometimes there is a partial net to save on. As for the difficulty of these jumps, these sit around the 5 to 6 range on average, but sometimes you'll see jumps over the difficulty of 7. For some perspective, Back There Benjamin's average jump difficulty is only in the 4 to 5 range, with a 7 to 8 jump near the end. But the obby is only around 4 minutes long on average. Imagine an obby with much harder jumps and extended 5 times. That's MIT. But the hardest jumps aren't even found in the main part of the obby, they're all found in the finale. One of the final jumps is already 7.9, but to keep this short, I'll be focusing on the final jump. After completing 20 minutes of torture, you'll have to land an 8.2 jump first try that requires extreme precision and abusing push lodging. But in this scenario, we have max skill. So could this actually be possible? Well, I believe that with enough luck and perseverance, it could be in the realm of possibility. Doing this obby consistently though is out of the question. As a shorter, tiered obby, it can definitely be fluked and completed in EToH's lifetime, but it's more based on luck than anything. So Shuggy, you could very well be real someday. For our next obby, we'll be continuing with the tiered obbies trend, because this is Novak, and it's another tier 20. Despite how long this obby seems to be, it's only around 10 to 15 minutes long, but to make up for that, practically every single fail ends your run. Similar to MIT, this obby utilizes the building type of jank, and it does that rather well, which could definitely bring more grinders to it. This obby contains a lot of trust jumps, mainly ones where you have to flick around an incline first. What comes with that is an abundance of low roof gameplay and very learny jumps. Fortunately though, we could most likely have enough precision later on to set up these jumps correctly, and this obby is 100% open to much more optimized strategies. In my opinion, the average jump difficulty is similar to Misplaced with 4 to 5 difficulty jumps, but there are much worse ones throughout the obby. With these two factors, it actually turns out to be a little easier than Misplaced in Time, but this is because of the length factor. When obbies get this difficult, things can become more luck-based than skill-based, just because there's a limit on how precise humans can be. It doesn't have to stop us though, as this is much more likely to be fluked since this is shorter than MIT. With all of this taken into consideration, this is very likely to be completed within the lifetime of EToH. As for Misplaced in Time, it was rather unlikely, but this obby is much more in reach. This is our final obby of the video, and what I believe to be the closest to possibility, Tower of the Drive Towards Human Limits. As you may know, this is currently under debate whether this is Unreal or Nil, but for our purposes, we'll consider it at the bottom of the Nil difficulty. The first thing that allows us to complete this is the punishment. On most fails, you can catch yourself on previous sections, and this can be crucial to passing the tower. The jumps on these floors here are extremely difficult, meaning that it would be very likely to fail them multiple times on a winning attempt. To be more specific, this tower has a mix of lodges, squeezes, and trust gameplay, but it is all purist. On an average run, this will take around 30 minutes, so it's the same deal with Misplaced in Time, where the gameplay is a little easier to compensate for the length. Something unfortunate though is how difficult the final floor is. Compared to the floors before it, this floor is absolute hell. This won't be the best for completing the tower, but it's still easier than the obbies before it. I'm even willing to say that this could be beaten within a year after reaching max skill, and confidently within EToH's lifetime. To make sure these claims about difficulty are accurate, we need more than one opinion on this topic, and from a credible person at that. This video has exactly that, because this is civRro, and they're debatably the top obbyist at the moment. If you don't know about them, they hold the current world record on a tower discussed earlier in this video, Tower of Impending Doom, and they were responsible for finding countless new strategies for the jumps in this tower. As you can tell, they know a lot about obbies, and the intricate details that make them properly difficult. Because of this, I decided to interview them about the obbies previously discussed, so let's find out what a more skilled obbyist thinks about these obbies. Well, first, I'm just going to give you the general question, then I'll be more specific. But do you think, without accounting for Nils being pushed down to Unreal, that it is possible to beat selling Nil today?
I think in the future it is possible, but I can't see it happening, but I feel like it would, just because I feel like games usually progress further than you expect, kinda like with Geometry Dash. I don't think people expected stuff like Silent Club stuff to be beaten, but that eventually was, so I think in the future it's possible, but I can't see it happening at the same time.
Yeah, I agree with that. There's definitely a lot of room for the skill improvement and stuff. So next question, and this should be pretty easy. Is Citadel Void possible, even with macros, and how long do you think it would take a grinder at the best possible skill to do it?
Yeah, I don't think it's possible at all. I don't think it's humanly possible to make it past 4-9. It might be humanly possible, like, in the far future to reach 9, but even doing floor 8 legit, I'm pretty sure is, like, one of the hardest things that would be done in obbies, so yeah, I can't ever see that getting beaten, especially because there's a lot of luck in it, and it would probably take, like, an eternity for any player at max skill to beat.
Yeah, because it's just like so much luck, so yeah, I definitely agree with that. And now I'm gonna ask you about an obby that's much more reasonable compared to Citadel Void, which is Misplaced in Time. And just like before, do you think it's possible, and how long would a grind take at max level?
I think it is possible to beat, but I couldn't see it happening for a really long time, especially because I feel like with an obby that hard, with Roblox physics, you can only go so far, so I feel like having an obby be that precise, like getting consistent at something like that would just be really hard, and I don't know how long it would take, probably several more years before it's like done.
Yeah, because I feel like stuff at that level, it's definitely gonna become less of like how consistent you are and more of just luck at a certain point. But the
Yeah.
next one up that I'm gonna ask you about is another tiered obby, and this one's called Novak. What do you think about this one?
I think it's more reasonable to beat than Misplaced in Time, but I still can't see it happening. I feel like eventually at obbies that difficult, they just get more frustrating to play, so I can't imagine it being done, but I feel like it is.
Finally, the last obby, or in this case, tower that I'll ask you about is the Tower of the Drive Towards Human Limits.
I feel like that tower, out of all the other obbies you mentioned, and like all the really hard obbies that we're like looking forward to, that one's definitely the most reasonable, especially because I'm pretty sure people have already like done sections of that tower rather than just all jumping it. So I could definitely see it being done in the future, but definitely not for probably several years at this point.
Yep, definitely. So, with that, that's probably gonna wrap up this quick interview. So, again, thank you, and hope this was insightful to you guys. Over the span of this video, we've gone in depth on the subject of this difficulty, but there's much more to explore. Various obbies sit on different points of Nil, and some of them really shine. Because of this, there's some honorable mentions that I'll briefly list out now. Tower of Existential Crisis, with some of the hardest jumps possible in Roblox. Void Star Death, a tier 24 that isn't even close to possibility. And the Trusses, one of the only tier 25 obbies to exist, and one that may rival the Citadel of Void with its extreme length and impossible gameplay. But focusing on what we've looked at today, I've come to the conclusion that without changing the difficulty of harder obbies, the Nil difficulty can be possible. But I can't say it fully confident. Some of the obstacles even in the easiest Nil obbies require major luck to get past consistently, and the stress and pain of grinding these obbies may lead the community to never beating them. For now though, we will consider it possible, but only the lower quarter. Obbies more difficult than low nil becomes so luck-based because of the human skill limit that it becomes impossible to see it getting done. Take Citadel of Void for an example, but like cvrro said, we almost always exceed our expectations on what is possible for us in games, and anything really can be achieved. To find out though, we can only look into the future, and maybe one day, once we've conquered towers far beyond our abilities, we'll look at this video and wonder how we got so far in the first place. Goodbye.